Greetings from Austin, Texas. My name is Lee Arbitman from the National Institute for Citizen Education in the Law. And with me today is Al Vera. Al is a government and economics teacher at Jefferson Davis Senior High School in Houston, Texas. Al is also the lead plaintiff in a major voting rights case decided by the Supreme Court of the United States on June 13th of 1996. In law-related education classes, we frequently study Supreme Court decisions in order to learn legal principles. But today, we have an opportunity to learn part of the human story behind a Supreme Court case. Al, thanks for joining us. How did this case start for you?
Well, this case actually started a long time ago. Back in 1970, after the 70 census, the Justice Department had a special congressional district drawn in Houston, Harris County for a black, and that became known as the Black Congressional District. And I never thought that was correct. My reading of the Constitution, I'm not an expert, but my reading of the Constitution didn't sound right to me that that should be done. So I wrote to the Justice Department. I never heard anything from them again, of course. Then in 92, after the 92 census, the same thing happened. This time they drew a congressional district in Harris County, Texas for Hispanic. Again, I was opposed to that, but by this time I had encountered already by chance a lot of times some people that were also of that same feeling. So we got together, discussed it, tried to determine what we might be able to do. A letter obviously wasn't going to work, so we decided to file a lawsuit. In January of '94, we filed a lawsuit.
How did you find lawyers who would be able to help you?
Well, interestingly, we called on a whim North Carolina and Louisiana, actually both states, and because we knew that they had lawyers working on these types of cases already, and we asked their lawyers if they knew anybody in Houston who might be interested in working on a case like this, virtually for no pay because we didn't have any money. And so they gave us some names, and we were extremely lucky that these people were interested in what we were interested in and were obviously helping us and did help us.
Now, as a government teacher, you had no doubt already taught about the court and knew something about the Supreme Court and knew this might be a long and drawn-out affair.
Yes, sir.
So take us back to the beginning of the case. When was the case actually filed in Houston, and when did that happen?
We filed in January of 1994, and to my surprise, the case was scheduled for a hearing by a 3-judge federal panel, which included a circuit court judge, in August of '94. I was surprised at that scheduling. But nonetheless, we had a case. The judges limited it to 5 days, and so we got our case in. The other side got their case in. I was sure from the very beginning that we were going to win, and in fact the ruling came down 3-0. As you know, all we needed was 2 judges to agree with us, but all 3 judges agreed with us. And so from then, we in our original pleadings asked the courts to declare all 30 congressional districts in Texas unconstitutional because they were based on race. But the 3-judge panel declared 3, 2 in Houston and 1 in Dallas, as unconstitutional.
What did you actually think was wrong with the setting up of majority-minority districts? What struck you as wrong about it?
You know, again, you have attorneys and other people that might think on a larger scale. To me, this was an individual case. I'm a Hispanic. I'm an American of Hispanic descent. My dad came from Mexico. But nonetheless, I was always taught by my family that we were all equal, that everybody was equal. When I teach government and economics, and when I was in college studying government and economics, I'm by no means an expert. But the Constitution says to me that we are all entitled to equal protection. That tells me by interpretation that you and I and every other American is an equal American. By my own government, the government of the state of Texas, coming in and saying, we're going to create a congressional district for Hispanics, that they in fact were telling me, no, you're really not equal. You are somebody that needs to be taken care of by the government. You're somebody that needs to be, you might say, protected by the government. I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like that my own government was telling me that. So it was a personal type issue to me.
After the trial court, the 3-0 decision, the case was then appealed to the United States Supreme Court.
That's
And
correct.
the initial case, you were suing actually the Richards administration,
We sued the governor and Richards and the state of Texas and the attorney general.
but then by the time it went to the Supreme Court, hadn't she lost?
She lost the election, so Bush became governor. So of course the Richards name was dropped from the case, and the Bush name was added to the case.
So you were actually suing Governor Bush and his
At that point-
administration.
well,
Or
at
he was
that point,
actually
he was
appealing
right,
the suit, so it became Bush versus
Vera.
Vera.
Exactly.
And were they enthusiastic about taking on this
The
lawsuit?
Bush administration was not.
So how was
However, the attorney general was still the attorney general that had been the attorney general under Ann Richards.
Okay.
So he pursued the case.
So were you able to actually go to Washington and hear the oral arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yes, I did. Oral arguments were heard on December the 15th, and I was there. I was very lucky to be there. I was there, and it was, I just can't express the feeling of being before that august body and hearing your name being used in the case. And if I might, at this point, at one point, I always knew, like I said, we were going to win the case because facts were on our side. It was very clear from depositions that they had given, on the other side that is, that race was used in determining where these lines were going to be drawn and which households on particular streets were going to be included in what districts. It was very obvious that race was the determining factor there. But if I might interject this, during oral arguments, I was listening to, of course, all the oral arguments, and they were good. But at one point towards the end, and this case took an extremely long time with the Supreme Court. At one point there towards the end, the attorney that was speaking for me knew, of course, I was in the audience, and he made the statement. These may not be his exact words, but he made the statement to the justices, and they said, Your Honors, in the final analysis, the state of Texas did not have the right to move, and he pointed to me, Al Vera, from one congressional district to another congressional district just because of his race. And for a layman, any layman could understand that at that point they knew that we had won the case.
You thought the case was won.
Oh, I knew it.
Were there any questions from specific justices that sort of tipped their hand? Do you remember anything that any of the justices said?
It was pretty clear from the very beginning that who was on your side and who wasn't. In fact, the very first attorney for the other side was, you might say, sanctioned by one of the justices. He told him not to insult his intelligence because he was using a term, I forget what it was now, but something like minority enhancing district or whatever term he used.
Do you remember which justice made that comment?
Justice Scalia.
Justice Scalia.
Yes.
Okay. So that
I
must
might
have been.
also add, this was very interesting. Again, I had been to the Supreme Court one time before as a tourist, and I found that there was, I don't know if this is common now, but there was some infighting, you might say, legal infighting in the discussion between the justices from one side to the other, especially between Justice O'Connor and Justice Ginsburg. They were sort of snibbling at each other legally while they were making points.
Good. Well, that must have been an interesting thing to see
It was extremely
in the context of your own case.
Yes.
Let me turn to sort of the aftermath of the case. In your own community, I know there's been some commentary, because not all Hispanics share your view, and in fact probably or possibly only a minority of Hispanics would share your view, that you've turned your back on your community or that you're a traitor. I mean, this must be kind of difficult at a personal level. How are you dealing with sort of the personal criticism and even some of the counter lawsuits, apparently, that have been lodged against you?
Well, I have had counter lawsuits. I would be lying to say that these comments didn't sting, because they do. But I have to understand that what I did was was right. I did what I thought was right. I try to teach my kids in my class, as I teach them government and economics, that as they learn of the system, if they see something that's wrong, that they should take a stand and try to correct it. I can't describe it. We have time for this. I can't describe it by exact words right now, but I will forever remember a passage of a pastor after World War II. He was a Lutheran pastor, and he said something to this effect. I hope I get it right. He said, first the Nazis came for the Jews, and I didn't do anything because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Unionists, and then I didn't do anything because I wasn't a Unionist. Then they came for such a group, such a group, and such a group, but he never did anything. And then at the end it says, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I'll always remember that.
Hmm. And so out of that, I suppose, come some lessons for you, because ultimately you're a teacher, not a legal warrior. Your profession is really as a government teacher, and there's lessons here for your students in your government classes, and those lessons are to stand up for what you believe?
Stand up. I always tell my students, I hope this is not something they learn just because of this lesson, but I always tell them that this is their community, this is their city, this is their even school, and it's only going to be as good as they make it. If they see something that needs improvement, by all means take those steps to improve it. It is so easy just to criticize, and I make sure that I make that point. Anybody can criticize, but you also have that, and I tell my students, you also have that added responsibility to try to make it better, to offer suggestions on how to make it better. And I have to say that this last year I was very honored by one of my ex-students who came to speak to us at the beginning of this school year. She happens to be a member of the Houston City Council, and I'm going to give her name right now because I think she deserves it. Her name is Gracie Science. And she's an ex-student of mine, but she's the first Hispanic to be elected to an at-large city council district anywhere in the nation. So she was elected as a Houston City Council member at-large, and she's been elected now for her third time. Anyway, she came to speak to the teachers at the beginning of the school year, and she made one point that, like I say, honored me. She said, I will remember, I said, I do remember when I was in Mr. Vera's class that he told us that if there's change to be made, then, and you want to help make those changes, you have to be sitting at that table where those changes are made. So I hope that this helps my students to learn that lesson and become involved in their community.
You know, although that was going to be my last question, the content of your answer does spur one more question, so if I could ask that. The fact that she was the first Hispanic who got an at-large seat in Houston sort of makes me wonder about this. If you have won your case before the Supreme Court, if the result of that is fewer majority-minority districts, will that change the number of people of color who are in the United States Congress, in your opinion? Will that make a difference?
I don't think it will, especially, of course, I don't know every city, but I do know Houston. I don't think it'll make a difference in Houston. I think voters will vote for competent, qualified, articulate candidates of any race or any gender who can speak to the issues, who have ideas, who have thoughts, who have genuine interest in trying to better their community. So I don't think we're going to see a decrease, as some members of my community have said. I don't think we're going to see a decrease in the number of Hispanics in governmental positions.
Al, thanks very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.